Welcome to the Vienna Summer of Logic. As you know, this is the largest scientific event in the history of logic, with more than 1,000 scientific talks from all of you. But the importance of the event is not so much its size, it is that it's a real celebration of logic. We are bringing together three main branches of logic: mathematical logic, logic in computer science, and logic in artificial intelligence. The Vienna Summer of Logic is organized by the Kurt Gödel Society and takes place at the Vienna University of Technology, where most of the organizers are working. And let me therefore first introduce the rector of the Vienna University of Technology, Sabine Sadler.
Thank you. Distinguished guests, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Today we celebrate the opening of the Vienna Summer of Logic, and it's a great pleasure for me to be here with you in this morning. Trans and interdisciplinary research are very important for the development of our university, and to this effect, the series of conferences that starts today fit very well with the strategic aims of TU Vienna. We have heard the Vienna Summer of Logic is the largest conference in the history of logic, covering applications of logic to mathematics, computer science, and artificial intelligence. You can imagine organizing a conference with about 2,000 participants is a great challenge for the organizing committee, and my thanks go to all the people that are working very hard for the success of the conference, especially to Helmut Veit and Matthias Baas as the main driver. Thank you. Please. You are here at the university that was founded in 1815 as K&K Polytechnisches Institut, and that starts its work with 3 professors and 47 students on November the 7th, 1815. Today, more than 3,000 scientists and about 28,000 students are working in this university. The strength of a modern university depends on its ability to attract excellent people in forward-looking scientific fields. And this is succeeded in the areas reflected in the Vienna Summer of Logic. For a long time, computational logic and computational intelligence have been strategic focus areas on different levels of the university and in 2 faculties, the Faculty of Informatics and the Faculty of Mathematics and Geoinformation. In graduate education, TU Vienna has a master program in computational intelligence, participates in a European master program in computational logic, has a TU Vienna founded doctoral program for mathematical logic in computer science chaired by Thomas Eiter, a brand new FWF founded doctoral program for logical methods in computer science chaired by Helmut Veit and Stefan Seider, and participates in a European doctoral program in computational logic. This high activity is also reflected in research grants and awards. We are a key member of the Austrian Research Network in Rigorous Systems Engineering, a strategic FWF grant to create a network of excellence in verification. Other signs of recognition include one Wittgenstein and 2 START awards by the FWF, 2 RC grants, and other grants. To support and focus these activities, we have created the Vienna Center for Logic and Algorithms, VCLA, which is organizing scientific workshops, visitor programs, summer schools, as well as events for general public. For me, the public program that attends the scientific part of the Vienna Summer of Logic is a spin-off of the VCLA activities. Last but not least, TU Wien is also the home of the Kurt Gödel Society, which is organizing this historic event, and whose executive vice president, Matthias Baas, is professor at this university. The Kurt Gödel Society has been an important driving force in the renaissance of logic in Vienna over decades, and many of its members have helped to create the thriving scientific community we have now. The participation of the other partner organizations of the Vienna Summer of Logic, IST Austria, the University of Vienna, and the Academy of Fine Arts demonstrate spirit of collaboration, enthusiasm for the Vienna Summer of Logic. I wish you all inspiring days in this Vienna Summer of Logic with a high scientific impact. Thank you.
Thanks, Mrs. Seidler. And now I would like to introduce the 3 chairpersons of the Vienna Summer of Logic. So, Matthias Baas, Executive Vice President of the Kurt Gödel Society, General Chair of the Vienna Summer of Logic, and Chair of the Mathematical Logic stream. Then Helmut White, who is the Chair of the Logic in Computer Science stream, and Thomas Eiter, who is the Chair of the Logic in Artificial Intelligence stream. Matthias?
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the city of Kurt Gödel, which fact we also honored by adding Gödel's thesis to all of your badges. This is a facsimile of the original, and please keep it because the original itself is lost. Yeah, so only this facsimile will survive, and as you are so many, it will survive for sure the next centuries. As we all know, logic is the art of reasoning necessary to think things which cannot be thought afterwards. And therefore, it is also necessary that logic preserves a certain degree of unity, which seems to get lost so often. And this is the major motive of this event, so that all, or at least most of the great streams of logic become more aware of the other streams. And therefore, I hope you have a very enjoyable conference, very good scientific inputs, and you will remember this Vienna Summer of Logic well. Thank you.
So, dear colleagues, let me say a few words about FLOCK. I had the privilege to participate as a young graduate student 18 years ago in FLOCK 96, which back then was a conference of a couple of days. It was just Kate, CAF, LIX, RTA, and it was brilliant. It was a formative experience for me to finally meet all these people, and I fell in love with FLOCK. Today, FLOCK is 100 events. We have 14 major conferences, which team up into 8 joint conferences. We have around 75 workshops. We have a dozen competitions. Yeah? And thanks a lot to my co-chair Stefan Seider for managing this incredible record number of workshops. And we've also accomplished a lot, right? In these 18 years, our research areas have acquired an importance that we did not dream of back then, both in industry and in computer science at large. SAT solving, theorem proving, SMT solving, model checking, just to name a few of them, have heavily affected disciplines like programming languages, software engineering, computer security, databases, computer engineering, cyber physical systems, and even biology nowadays. We'll hear about this soon. So if we think of Flock as Moshe Vardi's child, then Flock is coming of age indeed, and the Vienna Summer of Logic can be seen, among many other things, also as a celebration of our achievements as a Flock research community. And on the occasion of this celebration, we have introduced a few novelties, which we hope are interesting. We will have the Flock Olympic Games, which bring together these competitions. We have the Flock interconference topics. We have a couple of quite interesting and exciting panels, I believe. And last not least, we also have the outreach program to convey our passion for logic to the broader public and raise public awareness. And there's a Gödel exhibition, we have public lectures, and we have the Logic Launch, and they're all part of this enterprise. We also have a Gödel fanfare and a Gödel music piece composed. Thomas Eiter was the driving force behind this. And this is an... He's not, we all know Thomas Eiter. If he wanted to, he could. So this is and all these outreach activities is an ongoing effort. We have a lot of material prepared. So if any of you international guests have good media contacts in your home country and want to contribute, just get in touch with us. Okay, let me conclude. I'm wishing you an exciting and inspiring and intense and sunny 2 weeks in Vienna. Thanks a lot.
So, ladies and gentlemen, logic always played a very important role in artificial intelligence from the very beginning, so which is 60 years ago, because, as it was said before, logic is the art of reasoning, and in particular, in artificial intelligence, we try to study human-based reasoning, common sense reasoning, and other modes of reasoning. When we heard that there will be Flock and the Logic Colloquium in Vienna, it was more than natural also to seek liaison with these conferences, also to bring the major conference in artificial intelligence about knowledge representation and reasoning and its satellites to Vienna. So we are very happy to join the Vienna Summer of Logic and to have the Logic in Artificial Intelligence stream. And we hope that this event will give us a good opportunity and possibility for scientific discussion, exchange, and discourse. And we are looking forward to interesting days and hopefully fruitful also from the scientific side. Thank you very much.
I have now the pleasure to introduce Professor Dana Scott. Also, in this audience, he really does not need much introduction. He connects the past and the future of logic. He was friend of Kurt Gödel. He worked in nearly all areas of logic, so to say, one of the last polyhistors of logic, from modal logic to proof theory, and so on and so on. And in addition, he contributed with important, very important results to computer science, for which, for example, finite automata, for which he was awarded the Turing Award. Professor Scott is therefore the person which really represents best this event, or that what it should be. So please, Dana.
Thank you, thank you. I see some of my old friends standing in the back. Let's move toward the center if you can, so that people who want to sit down can sit down, please. There are more seats in the front, too. Thank you, thank you. To the rector, to the organizing committee, my wife and I want to thank you for the invitation and the support that make this visit possible. Between us, we have many ties to Austria and to Vienna, both professional and personal, and it's a real privilege and honor to be able to take part in this conference and the opening. I take it you notice the beautiful yellow poster out front. Yes, I decided that maybe the name of this conference is the Vienna Schnitzel of Logic. What do you think? I'm also very happy that the World Cup is over. Congratulations to Germany at the last minute. Now people won't be staying up late and drinking too much beer and missing their lectures. I would like to begin, if I may, to think about history. 100 years ago, what happened 100 years ago? I went to Wikipedia, which is the repository of all human knowledge, of course, and I found some interesting facts. For example, 1914, Charlie Chaplin makes his first movie. He also makes his second movie. Movies were not so long in those days. The Panama Canal opens in 1914. That's very important for my home state of California because it opened all kinds of commerce. In 1915, San Francisco put on a fabulous World's Fair, the Panama Pacific International Exposition, and they will celebrate the 100 years next year. And if the graft and cost overruns can be overcome, the new Panama Canal will open, allowing ships 4 times the size of the current ones to pass through, which will also impact California. Of course, we remember other things from that time. Here's a picture of the Austro-Hungarian Empire at about that time. It says 1910, but it was pretty much the same. Those are the different peoples, languages, and so on. Quite a goulash of cultures. Could it have remained stable without the First World War? It's hard to say. And fortunately or unfortunately, history is not an experimental science, and so we really can't say. However, we remember that at the end of June 1914, the Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his pregnant wife, the Duchess Sophie, were assassinated in Sarajevo. It pained me personally to read that a group erected a statue in honor of that assassin. The First World War was a completely unnecessary war. It changed the history of the world and had terrible effects that we're still suffering from. For example, the way the Middle East and Africa were chopped up after the First World War. Karl Kraus, in The Last Days of Mankind, has Franz Josef say about on his deathbed, Ich habe es nicht gewollt. I didn't intend it that way. The unintended consequences of war constitute the most difficult lesson to teach, and a lesson apparently that is impossible to learn, as we have seen throughout the 20th century, as we see in the current century, where battles are raging in many parts of the world. But we didn't come here to discuss the questions of war. We want to know, why are we here in Vienna now for this conference? And I think we can lay the blame right at the feet of this young man whom we all know. You see, at the end of the war, there were terrible upheavals, big movements of people. Let's not forget that in 1918 there was a catastrophic flu epidemic that went around the world, killing hundreds of thousands of people. So there were many difficulties here in Vienna, inflation, disruption, but in some memoirs that I've read, about 1920, things looked better and there was some optimism possible. And actually the 20s were an extremely productive decade here in Vienna. Gödel enters the university in 1924. He's already very well versed in mathematics. He's very impressed by the professors that he comes in contact with there. 1928, Hilbert speaks at the Bologna Congress of Mathematicians. He emphasizes the question about the decision problem. Hans Hahn tells Gödel about that speech, and of course, the teachers that Gödel had here made him very interested in logic then. By 1929, he had proved the completeness of the rules of first-order logic and gets his PhD. Very quickly thereafterwards, he proves the incompleteness of systems of mathematics, logic. He announces that at the Königsberg conference, but very few people really took notice. Maybe he didn't announce it loudly enough somehow. Von Neumann understood immediately what Gödel had done, and von Neumann then left logic to pursue other areas of mathematics. Carnap understood, but he didn't say anything at Königsberg. But of course, many people understood what Gödel had done. And thinking back there, I think we can get the advent of his work, completeness, incompleteness, and not so long afterwards the consistency proofs, as a turning point in logic. So in the formative period of logic, we had Frege, Dedekind, Peano, Russell, Whitehead, the Hilbert School. I would say that formative period of modern logic is where it is shown how logic applies to mathematics through axiomatics, through formalizing proofs, very importantly for giving rigorous definitions in mathematics. But Gödel, I think, created a paradigm shift. So the difference between logic before and after Gödel, I think, is this. Gödel showed how mathematics can be applied to logic. He invoked Königs und Ähnlichkeitslemma and the proof of the completeness theorem. He invoked principles of number theory in order to do coding and arithmetization of syntax to prove the incompleteness. He showed how transfinite recursion and induction can be applied to analyze logical properties in set theory, and so I think it's fair to call that applying mathematics to logic. And of course, that opens the new era where there's a feedback. Logic is applied to mathematics, mathematics is applied to logic, and we're still doing that today. What will be the next paradigm shift? I'm going to go out on a limb and make a conjecture for that. Namely, I think computers and logic will come together to give large proofs. You'll say, wait, we already have that. Yes, just to take two examples, the four-color theorem and the Kepler conjecture are very large proofs. But no one doubted the four-color theorem before it was established actually by several groups. No one doubted Kepler's packing of the spheres. The problem was to give a proof to establish that, and if there's a surprise, the surprise is that the proofs are so long. Of course, mathematicians will say, oh, just wait, someone will come up with short proofs. I don't believe it. I believe there are theorems that require always, interesting theorems that require always very long proofs. So to have a paradigm shift, computers and logic have to come together to discover new, unexpected facts in mathematics and give their proofs. Mathematicians won't listen to you unless you do something new. So we have to put together all of our technology to really come up with new things. Maybe Vodovsky's univalence axiom will lead the way, but of course that's a chapter in constructive logic, and there are many things to think about the relation between constructive and non-constructive methods. So we will see. So I say, I will live, I'm 82 this year, I will live to see that paradigm shift to postmodern logic. I won't live to see practical quantum computing. I may not live to see the answer to P different from MP, but I wish someone would get it out of the way. It's a terrible nuisance. So that's my projection about the future here. Now, returning to history, I want to emphasize a few things. Gödel did not spring full-grown from the head of Zeus. He was the product of the mathematical culture here in Vienna. And he had wonderful teachers. Among them, of course, was Hans Hahn. Hans Hahn was already a major mathematician before he had the call to Vienna. I'm very happy to say that my wife and I were able to visit Lily Hahn in her old age. Here, as you know, Hahn died very young, very suddenly. She had on her table the wonderful portrait, that full-face picture of Hans Hahn with the round glasses and the clear look. He must have been both an imposing figure and a very inspiring teacher. And of course, he was one of the key things that made the culture for logic here possible because he engineered the appointment of Schlick to the chair of Boltzmann and Mach. And Schlick also already had a very good career before coming to Vienna. He was one of the first philosophers of science to write about relativity. He became a close friend of Einstein in Berlin. And I think Feigl is entirely correct when he says here, Schlick had an unsurpassed sense for what is essential in philosophical issues, and that is the inspiration that, combined with the mathematical side with Hahn, was the leading part for the Vienna Circle. I would also like to mention another person, Karl Menger. He was very important for Gödel. I haven't been able to figure out where that picture was taken. We got it from his daughter, who's our friend. So he comes earlier to Vienna. He hears Hahn lecture on what we would call point set topology. Hahn says there's no good definition of a curve. Menger goes home and thinks about it and says, I have a definition. The undergraduate comes to the professor, who very politely listens to him and realizes that he has a very good idea, and that led very quickly to Menger's thesis and to the work on dimension theory. There, Menger is then invited to be an assistant for Brouwer in Amsterdam. The first year goes very well. Then Menger becomes very put out with Brouwer, who doesn't really give him sufficient credit for what he was doing. And then luckily, after Reidemeister accepts another call, Menger is able to come back to Vienna as a professor. And being a very young person, he had an excellent relationships to students. He was a great mentor for Gödel. His colloquium gave Gödel the opportunity to speak and write papers several times, and they remained very close friends. Now, the connection that we have with Menger is that he was one of the closest friends to my wife's father, Otto Schreier. Schreier was a student here in Vienna earlier. He then went as a docent to Hamburg. He was there with Artin. He was there with Benke, who became the famous German analyst. Wolfgang Pauli was there in Hamburg. They were all very, very close friends. And through his piano teacher, he meets a woman that he marries, who became my wife's mother. Tragically, he died just a month before she was born. Her mother comes to Vienna, where his parents are, and so my wife is born here in Vienna. And the Menger family is a very, very close friend. Menger is one of my wife's godfathers. The other was Benke. And later years, when Menger was in Chicago and my wife's family was there, they remained close friends to the family, and we're still in contact with children of Menger. I would like to point out one of Menger's accomplishments. This is Menger's sponge. It's a direct generalization of Cantor's middle third set. In fact, if you trace a line just across the middle of the front face there, the one-dimensional line across there is Cantor's middle third set. And then the two-dimensional face there is often called Sierpinski's carpet. That's an example of the kind of carpet used by Viennese landladies. It has a lot of holes in it, but it's still very serviceable. And Menger generalizes it to 3 dimensions, but it's not the generalization that's important. It's what he proves, that this is a universal space of Urysohn dimension, Menger dimension 1, which contains as subspaces all other examples of compact metric spaces of dimension 1. So it's a universal space that contains everything. And when you're bored in listening to the lectures here in this conference, I encourage you to prove that the measure of the Menger sponge is 0. And here's a hint. Prove that the complement has major 1. You can easily write down an equation for the complement there. The complement C is, there are 7 little cubes that have been cut out, so that's a start in getting the size of the complement. And then the other pieces there are entirely similar to the whole Menger sponge, and so you can continue the equation there and then prove by solving that simple linear equation that the complement has measure 1. I also would like to warn you, if you are sightseeing here in Vienna and someone comes up to you and says, look at this beautiful Viennese sponge I have here. Wouldn't you like to buy one as a souvenir? Don't do that. They're very dangerous. If you get your fingers caught inside, you'll never get them out. It won't increase the weight of your luggage, of course, but if you try to make it hold water, you'll have a terrible accident with that, so don't buy one. Just a quick, I only wanted to do this for the dates here, just a quick thing to think of who was here and who took part or didn't take part in the Vienna Circle. Of course, Wittinger and Furtwängler were older professors, not part of the Vienna Circle, but very influential for the people that I mentioned who studied here. But then there are the people we know from the Vienna Circle. Many people like Wittgenstein and Popper never wanted to be associated with the Vienna Circle, but others did, and of course there were important visitors like Tarski and Quine who were very, very much influenced. So I just wanted to give you a very quick sense of the period and the people that were involved there. In conclusion, I would like to think about Gödel's legacy. I'm reminded of what was done for Sir Christopher Wren in London. He was a 17th century brilliant person. He was a professor of mathematics at Logic. He did work in optics, physics. He was a very influential founder of the Royal Society in London. And then after the terrible fire of London 1666, he had the chance to build many churches and, of course, to build St. Paul's Cathedral. When Christopher Wren died in his 90s and was buried in St. Paul's, his son erects a plaque on the wall that says in part, "If you seek his monument, look around you." If you seek his monument, look around you. I would like to transpose that sentiment to Gödel. If you seek Gödel's monument, look around you. Here we are. We're the followers of Gödel, of course, doing things that he might never have imagined, might not even like too much, but we're the successors of what he did. And so please consider yourself part of Gödel's monument as you enjoy the conference and as you enjoy Vienna. Thank you very much.
Many thanks for this excellent introduction to our conference. And as Professor Scott is so excelling in logic, we dare to present him a book also from the history of this time in Vienna, which is containing some warnings again for conference organizers, but also a warning against logic, because the answer against the logical argument of the official is, where should this lead to if you start with logic where one sentence throws the other one behind it? And so, please. Want to
morning. The Vienna Summer of Logic starts, after this introduction, with a talk by one of the brightest and most fascinating personalities in theoretical computer science, Christos Papadimitriou. Christos is Greek. He has studied at the Technical University of Athens and at Princeton. He is a professor of computer science at Berkeley, and he has been at many other top universities before. Christos is an immensely deep and an immensely broad computer scientist, but he's also a mathematician, he's an engineer, he's a logician, he's a natural philosopher, and he's a gifted author. He is thus a true polymath and a Renaissance man. His innate scientific curiosity has been driving him towards the most important, the toughest, and the most intriguing open problems, not only in the center of computer science, but also in related disciplines or disciplines where computer science can be applied. He has done an amazing amount of fundamental work in theoretical computer science that has given him a lot of accolades, which I will not now list all, but he has also used methods of theoretical computer science to solve important problems related to computer science, but in other areas. And let me just mention two examples here. So the first one is in economics. Christos and his co-workers clarified the complexity of finding Nash equilibria. He got the Gödel Prize for this. Eventually such a work, and it's a very deep work because I know it personally, I read it and studied it. It's a very deep mathematical and interesting work. Such a work could eventually be rewarded by the Nobel Prize in economics. Then he attacked problems in evolutionary biology, understanding the equations and the algorithms of life and of evolution. This is actually the title. This is what he will speak about today. Before I ask you, Christos, to give you a lecture, I would like to mention two other things very briefly. So one, Christos is a very successful writer. He has written fantastic textbooks, the nicest textbooks in complexity and in other, on several other topics. So fantastic monographs too. But he has also written novels, and more recently the famous book Logic Comics, which actually is very much related to the Vienna Circle and to what we just heard from Dana, in the form of a comics. And I also want to mention that Christos is deeply engaged in justice, in the cause of justice, let's say, and he writes articles for a Greek newspaper on this topic, and I've known him for a long time, always as a fighter for justice. So Christos, thank you very much for all you have given us and you are still giving us, and we are now looking forward to your keynote talk.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Hello, everybody. Many thanks to the organizers for inviting me to this wonderful event in Logic, in the city of Logic. And of course, everybody's wondering, why am I talking to you about to logicians about in a historic event in Logic about evolution? The short answer is that this is what I'm interested in now. But there are reasons why I think evolution should be very attractive to logicians. For example, consider these two quotes by two of the last century's most important biologists. And they do shed by evolution into a light of universality and epistemological subtlety that should be attractive to logicians. For example, Jacques Monod thinks that among all scientific fields, evolution has the world record for the ratio of people who think that they know something about it and to people that actually, number of people who actually know something about it. Okay, so in the spirit of the wonderful remarks by Dana before, I'm going to start with the history of evolution, because I think nothing illuminates more the subject, this particular subject, than its history. First of all, you may think that evolution started with Darwin. Nothing is more wrong than this. But at the time of Darwin, evolution was commonplace, was banalité, scientific banalité. Everybody knew about evolution. In fact, Darwin's own grandfather was one of the important thinkers in evolution before Darwin. Another one was this Frenchman, who was the greatest zoologist since Aristotle, and had the unfortunate fate of being remembered for his only mistake, which is that he believed that experiences acquired during our life can be inherited, for example, amputations. We'll come back to Jean-Baptiste later. Since I'm talking about computational ideas and the theory of evolution, I should not fail to mention this. This is the great-grandfather of the computer, and you see here that almost 40 years before Darwin, he was saying this amazing, I mean, he didn't say it exactly this way, but he really did say that, that God created not species, but the algorithm for creating species, which of course is a very nice try. And we have Darwin, this amazing book, The Origin of Species. I totally recommend all logicians to read this book. They teach this book in the Department of Rhetoric in Berkeley, because it is an amazing example of scientific rhetoric, an unsurpassed example of scientific rhetoric. Nothing that ever written is as persuasive in a very difficult arena as the origin. Darwin did not introduce evolution. There had been a dozen books on evolution before this one, but this provided evolution with flesh and bones. In particular, it pointed out the engine of evolution, natural selection, and also pointed out the great scientific hypothesis of evolution, which is common ancestry, that we all come from one species, one ancestral species. Darwin mentioned a few species, but from his correspondence, we know that he meant one species. During his lifetime, Darwin had presided over 6 editions of The Origin. And in fact, in the web today, you can find a veritable phylogenetic tree of these editions, including commentary about the differences, which of course is very interesting. And one of the most interesting measures, statistics, is the number of mentions of the word God in evolution, which goes up and down, has an interesting harmonic of 2. And of course, harmonics of 2 betray inner conflicts. Okay, so that's one of the interesting things. So even if you don't follow my advice and you don't read The Origin, you have absolutely no excuse not to read these 2 papers, because there are 4 pages and you can find them on the web. So here is a story. Wallace was another great biologist of the time of Darwin. And Wallace was very different. I mean, Darwin was from the privileged classes. Wallace was a worker biologist. He was some kind of Indiana Jones of biology. Okay, so what he was doing is he would go to Borneo and come back with crates full of orangutans and snakes and strange plants and animals. And he would sell those to the British aristocracy and thus finance his trip to Malaysia 3 years later. So in 1858, he was burning of fever in Malaysia, and he woke up one morning, and in the days of his disease, he figured out natural selection. He was obviously struck. He said, okay, evolution, we now know how it works. But what does he do? He's in Malaysia. So he wrote a letter about it to the natural scientist he respected most, and that happened to be Charles Darwin. I was not there when Darwin received the letter, because Darwin had been working for almost 30 years on his origin by that time, okay? And he would probably have worked another 30 years, had not Wallace forced him to publish. So, right, exactly, deadlines. Yeah. So, the way he handled the matter was with impeccable integrity. He convened a meeting of the Royal Society of Biologists, which by that time was called, I guess, the Linnean Society. And there, two letters were read. One was Wallace's letter to Darwin, and the other was Darwin's letter to Lyell, where he was explaining his ideas, so that the independent discovery was established. So the main reason I'm mentioning this in this talk is because Darwin, in his 2 pages, one of the pages, he wastes on defining exponential growth to the scientific elite of his time. So, it is a concept which, if you stop a person in the street and you start explaining to them, they will interrupt you mid-sentence and say, okay, I get your point. What's your point? Okay, so because back then, exponential growth was completely unknown. We have been living it for 50 years now, and we know. Why does Darwin need exponential growth? He needs it because it's a part of his argument. He describes how 2 seagulls in 10 years become 1,000 seagulls, and in 20 years they become 1 million seagulls. And the question is, this is what the laws of inheritance, the mathematics of inheritance dictate. And why is it that we never see beaches with a million seagulls? And the reason is that life is tough, and only the fit survive. Okay, this is sort of and of course Darwin learned exponential growth from the economist Malthus. All right, so the world's most brilliant scientific argument, still many questions left unasked. Chief among them, what is the role of sex? Darwin says about 5 or 6 times during the origin that he does not understand sex. And there is a reason why he does not understand sex. Sex was actually mentioned explicitly as a threat to his theory. Because in Victorian England, in Victorian science, sex was understood as mixing 2 liquids to create a new liquid. And if you keep mixing liquids of different color, a nondescript brown emerges universally, okay? So how do you explain diversity, which was so crucial to Darwin's argument? Diversity within species, not diversity among species, okay? Look around you, all right? I mean, we are very different. So how do you explain this? By sex, if sex happens, okay? So that's impossible. How do complex adaptation arise? I'll come to that. How do you explain the eye? How do you explain the wing? And how is diversity maintained? Briefly, the greatest biologist since Darwin is probably this wise man from Augsburg called Weismann. So he and one, he was the final he articulated the ultimate argument against Lamarck, which is amazingly computational and forward-looking. again, he didn't say it this way, but really that's what he said. The mapping from genotype to phenotype is one way, okay? And this means that our life's experience, let's say an amputation, cannot find its way into our gonads and then reverse engineer the genetic code in order to create amputation, okay? So Lamarck must be wrong. Then genetics happened. Genetics were discovered, all right? So we are all scientists who are all really very, very eager and impatient for our ideas to have impact. So how many, this is one of the 10 greatest papers in the history of science. How many references does it have? Okay, so in the first 35 years of its existence, it had 3 references. Okay, so and I have not read these 3 papers, but those who have tell me that none of these people got it. Okay, you know, they didn't get it. They didn't understand what. But the point is that in 1901, what happened is this: that the laws of genetics were rediscovered. Okay, Mendel's laws were rediscovered, and once they were rediscovered, somebody went back and said, "Wait a minute, this guy already had it." Okay, so 35 years ago, and so Mendel's laws seem to be, first of all, absolutely convincing. There was much less argument about them than about Darwin. And they seem to be at loggerheads with Darwin, okay? That they seem to be contradicting Darwin, because Darwin's theory was explicitly about continuous traits. And Mendel showed to us that traits are discrete, okay? And as a result, there was a true crisis, scientific crisis, in the sense of Thomas Kuhn in evolution. And eventually, where mathematicians, if you need an extra thing to be proud of about mathematics, while the foundations of mathematics were contemplated, at the same time, 3 great mathematicians came up with a core model with which they reconciled Mendelism with Darwinism. And I'm going to explain to you briefly this model. Imagine this. So what's the Fisher-Wright model? It's a mathematical model that captures Darwin's theory in the context of Mendel. And so imagine that we have a 2-gene organism. Such things don't exist. You need at least a couple of hundred to get started. But suppose that, you know, I was given a 2-dimensional screen to project on, okay? So we have to have a 2-gene organism, all right? So, and there you have, the rows are alleles of gene A, allele means variant, and the columns are alleles of gene B. And what are these numbers? These numbers are fitness of the combination. In other words, this genotype will have an expectation of 7 children in expectation, all right? It's going to have create 7 children. This is this genotype's fitness. And then you have these numbers here, these frequencies, which don't pay too much attention because I just made them up and I'm sure they don't even add to 1, okay? But what they mean is that imagine that in a particular situation, this population will have 9% of its elements have this particular genotype, and 9% of its elements have, 2% of its elements have this particular genotype, and so on. 8% of its elements have, of its members have this particular genotype. And then what you can do is you can look forward. What happens in the next generation? In the next generation, these 10% will marry randomly, will procreate with perhaps these, and then with half probability because of recombination, sex. These two possibilities will equal probability emerge, and as a result, you have a rather easy difference equation that gives you the frequency of the next generation, okay? And this is how populations evolve, right? On top of that, of course, you have other aspects of evolution, which is mutations, speciation, creation of new species, changes in the environment, which change the fertility, the fitness of the genotypes, and whose models are a little more controversial and there are more disparities. And you have a complete mathematical theory which to this day is considered the standard way of understanding evolution. All right. Huge, huge questions remain. What is the role of sex? Let me explain why sex is so problematic. Listen, when I say sex, I see a awkward smile in your faces. Don't worry, it happens to everybody, all right? The reason is you are not biologists, you are logicians, all right? So when biologists hear sex, what comes to their mind is the mystery of recombination in evolution, okay? It took me a very long time to become a biologist in this specialized sense, okay? So why is sex a problem? Sex is a problem for the following reason, that it imparts concrete disadvantages, all right? For example, here are two. It disadvantages to individuals. Imagine a young woman who has 2 children, all right? Then she looks at these 2 children and says, all right, these 2 children, between them, have 1 copy of my genes, okay? And the other copy comes from the oaf in the couch, okay? So why am I doing this to myself? If I was acting parthenogenetically, I would have 2 children with 2 copies of my gene. All right, so this is crazy. Why, so of course you can say that you need another individual to help you raise these 2 children, but this applies to 0.001% of all organisms. All right, now how about the rest? All right, why are they doing it? Okay, so that's something to ponder about. Here is a second, that sex is deleterious to species, to populations. Why is that? Imagine that at some point there was the perfect human, okay? Let's say a man, okay? He had perfect hair, perfect skin, perfect lungs, perfect liver genes, everything, okay? Everything was perfect. So this person lived 200 years and had 100 children, okay? The problem is that all his children were deeply imperfect, okay? Because he never met a perfect woman, all right? So that this is a tragedy, right? Because truly successful combinations are lost forever, okay? So this is something that is inherent in sex, okay? It does create new combinations, but then he breaks them up, okay? So these are 2 of the disadvantages of sex, which is unclear, okay, how they are reconciled with other advantages. There is no agreement in biology. How is variation preserved? Okay, selection seems to be going against variation. Okay, if some alleles are good ideas, they're eventually fixed, and variation is gone. There are mutations, but they operate in much slower time scale. Okay, so why is so much variation around? And how do complex adaptations like the eye arise? Okay, forget the eye. Okay, eusociality in insects. Okay, how did it arise? Okay, that's why do 99% of all ants give up procreation and decide to become slaves for all their lives? Okay, that's a huge mystery. And really, the true question is this: how can this crude mechanism account for everything we see around us? Okay, Darwin was disbelieving. Okay, so Darwin wrote to a friend that if you ask me if I truly believe that this crude mechanism created the eye, I'll tell you no, I can't believe it. Okay, and of course there is disbelief in computer science. Les Valiant, no stranger to logic, has articulated in this imaginative way: how can you find a 3 billion long string in 3 billion years, 3 billion being the number of years since 3.5 billion being since the beginning of life, And as a result, he created the variance theory of learning, whose brilliant theory, whose end result is to instill even more doubt, okay? Because what he proves is that under certain models, learning, evolution is weaker than statistical learning, which is quite weak, okay? For example, you cannot learn the exclusive OR. All right. So here is a way to articulate it. What algorithm would have created all this, okay, in a mere trillion steps, okay? A trillion steps is the number of generations that have been since the beginning of life. A trillion steps may sound like a generous number to you, but remember, your cell phone has made a trillion steps since the beginning of my talk, okay? Your cell phone has not accomplished much, okay? So the surprise here is that we have an answer, okay? In other words, if you stick around, I'm going to present to you an algorithm which I believe has brought us all this, okay? So in any event, speaking of algorithms, evolution has become extremely popular in computer practice in the last 30 years. Genetic algorithms, famously proposed by Holland in 1980, calls for this program. To solve an optimization problem, you create a population of solutions. You consider them as genotypes. The fitness of these genotypes are precisely the objective function. In other words, they procreate with success proportional to their objective function. They also mutate. And eventually, some very good solutions are bound to appear in the soup. Okay, so this is what genetic algorithms believe. And then there is another variant of this, which actually predated it, which we call simulated annealing now. But basically, it imitates asexual evolution, no sex, but just mutations which are adapted with probability increasing with the fitness differential. And suddenly, the mystery of sex deepens. Why? Because simulated annealing, which simulates asexual revolution, works fine, okay? In the following rigorous sense, that there are computational problems which people are deeply interested in, like placement and interconnect for chips, for which practitioners swear by simulating annealing, okay? And a lot of other approaches have been tried with less success, whereas genetic algorithms don't work. And of course, I lose friends every time I say this, okay? But we are logicians. This is a true statement, and I have to say it, to repeat it, all right? I mean, so, and what do I mean by that? I mean the converse of the opposite of the problem. That I'm not aware of a single problem for which many approaches have been tried in earnest and genetic algorithms came triumphant on top. Okay, so this is what I mean. In nature, the opposite happens. How come nature's favorite trick, when programmed on a computer, falls on its face? Okay, it is a huge mystery. So here is a radical thought. What if sex is a mediocre optimizer? In other words, genetic algorithms should not be expected to work. What if sex optimizes something else, and if this something else is the reason we have sex around? Okay, and 6 years ago, with simulations, we proved that indeed, as everybody knew and expected, natural selection under asex does optimize fitness, but under asex it optimizes something else, which we call mixability, which is the ability of alleles to perform well with a broad spectrum of other alleles. Mixability means tolerance, okay? Good mixers are promoted with sex, all right? So let me explain. Let's come back to that. And A-sex will select the biggest numbers. After a few generations, only 7s and 8s will be around. And after many generations, only 8s will be around. Whereas, with sex, the rows and columns, not the largest numbers, but the low rows and columns with the biggest average are going to be selected. All right? And in mathematics and pictures, here is a fitness landscape. Here are the peaks, here are the troughs or valleys, and here is another element which we call the plateau. And you can prove mathematically that unless the peaks are ridiculously high, more than twice the plateau, then under sex, the plateau will prevail and the peaks will become extinct. Okay, so it's real, all right? I mean, in sex, fitness is not optimized. Something else happens. Something much more subtle happens, all right? I mean, so you shouldn't have expected genetic algorithms to work. Let me change the subject. Pointer dogs. I don't know if you know what pointer dogs are, but basically they're dogs, hunting dogs, which when they are in the forest, and there is life around them, they point toward it, okay? Okay, so that's a pointer dog in this room would be totally confused, all right? I mean, so this particular pointer dog points at Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin was extremely interested in pointer dogs. He befriended the shady characters in southern London that were breeding pointer dogs. And you know how pointer dogs are bred? Here's how they're bred. You take good hunting dogs and you train them to point. You take the most successful pointers and you breed them. You continue this for 3 generations, and then the puppies can point. Okay? Very strange. Okay? Think about it. It shouldn't happen. Okay? So let's. This particular pointer dog is pointing at Cyril Waddington, which is the greatest, perhaps, biology experimenter of the last century. And I'm going to describe to you. Okay. This is Vienna summary logic, and Boolean logic will make a cameo appearance now. Okay, so let me describe an amazing experiment that he did. He started with a bunch of flies. Incidentally, you can tell I'm not biology because I call them flies. Okay, otherwise somebody would stand here throwing Drosophila melanogaster at you. Okay, right? So he took a bunch of flies at room temperature and raised their temperature to tropical. And then he noticed that a few of them had changed. Something subtle happened to their wings, but it's much more graphic to say that their head became red. Okay, so let's say that their head became red. All right, so he continued this for a few generations, and then he bred them. He picked the changed ones and bred them, and suddenly 60% had changed. Okay, which is not yet unbelievable. And then he continued breeding, selecting the red-headed ones and breeding them, and the percentage increased until at generation 20, almost all of them have changed, all right? And then Waddington did something amazing. Can you imagine what he did? He kept the temperature high all this time, but then he lowered the temperature. What happens if you lower the temperature? What should happen if you lower the temperature? Red heads should go away, all right? But they don't. 25% stay changed. So this treatment has created genetic changes, okay? How come? All right? Mutations cannot have happened, okay? This is not enough time for mutations. I mean, no, this shouldn't happen, okay? It's like a Viennese couple goes to Crete for the summer, and they come back with dark skin, and 5 years later they have a baby, and it's dark skin, okay? No, this is not right, okay? So what happened? This is exactly what happened to the dogs, right? I mean, the genetic assimilations. Adaptations to the environment become genetic, okay? This is really the ghost of Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, all right? I mean, no, yeah. So let's try to find a logical explanation, all right? Truly logical. what we want is a Boolean function, okay, with a bunch of Boolean variable x and an extra Boolean variable h, standing for high temperature, which has the following properties. Initially, let's say that all variables have equal probability of being 0, 1, and you select at random a combination. Initially, with h equals 0, the probability that this is satisfied is 0. But when you increase the variable to 1, to the h variable to 1, it becomes 15%. And if in the second generation, in other words, if you select from the new distribution, and the probability of satisfaction becomes 60%. And after 20 generations of breeding, of selective breeding, it becomes 99%, but then if you lower the temperature, it stays at 25%. Okay, so can you think of a Boolean function that is like this? Okay, and yes, it exists. Suppose that red hat is the following threshold function. You require that these 10 genes, 0, 1, 10 genes, plus 3 times the environmental variable, be greater than or equal to 10, all right? Then all properties of the Wadding experiment are satisfied, okay? So there is a genetic explanation. I was really proud to discover it, and then somebody told me that 60 years ago, somebody called Stern, in the American Naturalist, had made essentially the same conjecture. All right, but now we can become more ambitious. What if we have an arbitrary function? We don't have an environmental variable h. If you have an arbitrary Boolean function, and if you assume that the genotypes that satisfy this Boolean function have a tiny evolutionary advantage, an epsilon evolutionary advantage, then will this trait be fixed eventually? If this is true, I think that we have a working hypothesis of how complex traits can evolve. All right, I mean that basically that there are these logical functions which of genes, which genes were doing something else before, which if satisfied, they give you some amazing new property. And the answer is yes, and that's a result that we proved recently. It's going to appear in the next Fox conference, that any Boolean function of genes which confers a small evolutionary advantage will be eventually fixed with high probability with polynomial population. In other words, the number of everything stays polynomial in the number of genes. Okay, the number of population, the number of generation, I should say polynomial in the number of genes and the inverse probability of satisfaction. In other words, this function should have enough satisfying truth assignments. You see, this is not a heuristic for satisfiability at all. Okay, I know that many of you are interested in heuristics for satisfiability. Why? Because that's not evolution is what is interested in. All right. I think this thought experiment shows you the gulf between genetic algorithms and heuristics. In heuristics, what we want is to create a population which contains at least a few outstanding individuals. Evolution is in a different business. Evolution wants to create good populations. That's a completely different matter. Okay? So the genetic algorithms are in the wrong business. Okay, that's my point. Okay. Which you can interpret that novel complex adaptations can emerge through sex in the whole population just through statistical manipulation and without what is called Fisherian propagation, that something happens in a family because it's advantageous, it spreads further, and takes over the population. Okay. Neutral theory and weak selection. This is how evolutionists think of evolution right now. That evolution proceeds not, that's Kimura was one of the greatest evolutionary thinkers of the past century, proceeds not by leaps upwards, but mostly horizontally, through statistical drift, okay? And And the mathematical articulation of weak selection says that fitness landscapes are not like this, but more like this, okay? That the numbers are sort of close. There are not dramatic differences like between 0 and 8, okay? That things are almost horizontal, all right, for most of the time. Okay. Weak selection that has as consequences that linkage equilibrium. In other words, suddenly allele frequencies become independent, okay? And the population can be thought of as a soup of alleles, all right? And this is a great mathematical simplification. Let me change completely the subject. I'll talk about the experts problem. Imagine that every day you must consult. So if you were lost before, you can start again, okay? You know, so this is a very simple problem and has an amazing solution. So if you don't know it, you owe it to yourself to listen. Okay, so imagine that every day you must select one of 10 financial experts, all right? And every day you get advice from them, and this could be anywhere from losing you $1,000 this day or winning you $1,000 this day, okay? Okay. After 3 years, you have worked with these experts for 1,000 days, and you look back and you say, oh, I was so stupid. Expert 3 was the best of all these experts. I wish I knew this 3 years ago. I would be a rich man now, okay? This is what you think. All right. The challenge is, can you do almost as well? Can you do essentially indistinguishably as well as the best expert? All right? In retrospect, okay, can you be omniscient in the beginning? All right? And the answer is yes, you can. Huge surprise, okay? So, you know, it can be done. And there is a very simple algorithm. This fact is so hard to believe that it's been discovered independently about 6 times and forgotten, okay? So in economics, it's called Hannan consistency. In financial economics, Tom Cover discovered it in 1980. In AI, it's called Winnow. In AI, it was rediscovered under boosting. And in game theory, it's called no-regret learning. Theoretical computer scientists taking credit for discovering it last. We call it multiplicative weight updates algorithm, and not having forgotten it yet, okay? So let me tell you how it works. Initially, you assign all experts the same probability. And at each step, you increase the weight of each by a factor of, in other words, you boost a little the experts that did well, and you decrease a little the experts that didn't, okay? And then you normalize to keep them probabilities. And this works, okay? This is guaranteed to give you, in the end, results almost equal to the best expert, all right? It does work. The amazing thing is that this algorithm, this extremely crude, common sense, primitive algorithm, solves problems it had no right to hope to solve, okay? Like zero-sum games, convex programming, network conjecture, okay? Complicated problems that had haunted people for decades to solve. This algorithm does solve. And computer scientists, of course, see this with disbelief, all right? I mean, and of course, there are the other disbelievers. And the amazing thing is that these two disbeliefs are identical. Okay, let me explain. Here's the theorem. Under weak selection, in other words, under the regime that biologists, evolutionists today believe that captures mathematically what evolution is. Evolution of a species is a game, okay? By this means that the equations of evolution become identical to the equations governing a repeated game, okay? The players are the genes, okay? The genes are the players, all right? We have 20,000 players inside us acting now, okay? The strategies are the alleles of these genes, okay? The probabilities, okay, we know that in games we hedge our bets, okay? We play strategies to certain probabilities. the frequencies with which we play the probabilities are precisely the frequencies of the alleles in the population, okay? In other words, the population has the state of all players, all right? Contains the state of all players. These games, these genes have a common utility. In other words, this is not the selfish gene paradigm of Dawkins, okay? It is the community-minded gene, okay? The genes have a common fitness, which is the fitness of a common utility, which is the fitness of the organism. It's a coordination game. Coordination games are the easiest kind of game. There is no conflict in coordination games. And the coordination games, of course, are completely uninteresting to game theories. They are interesting to computer scientists because they are interesting when the agents are cognitively limited, cognitively challenged, all right? And of course, genes are such. And of course, the great surprise is that the game is played through the multiplicative weights update. That's a recent result by Chastain, Livnat, and my colleague Umesh Vaziranian. Variation preservation. So I'm almost done. You can ask this question. Can we do some reverse engineering? Of course, genes are not interested in optimizing anything. Nature is not interested in optimizing anything. But suppose it were. What is the function that's being optimized by this strange dance? Okay, that's what we're asking now. Okay? Is there a function? Can you reverse engineer a function that is, each gene is optimizing this particular function? And yes. The answer is cumulative expected fitness, which is another surprise by itself, plus the entropy of the distribution of this gene. Okay? So genes appear to be deeply interested in preserving their variation. Okay? In preserving the utility, in increasing the entropy of their distribution. So, the curious successes of both evolution and the multiplicative weights algorithm, as you know, theoretical computer science is not very good at solving mysteries, okay? But it's extremely good in uniting mysteries, all right? I mean, so, for example, Karp's paper was the unification of 21 mysteries, all right? I mean, so, my biologist friends don't like me to say this. I mean, my biologist enemies, of course, don't like me to say this, but but even my biologist friends don't like me to say this. I believe that for a computer scientist, that's enough for a motivation. Okay, I mean, to enable such an amazing algorithm is a good enough reason to have sex around. Okay. I hope I showed you why I'm interested in evolution. It's an amazing topic, research topic, extremely open-ended, very, very friendly to our way of thinking. We discovered some interesting connections with algorithms, gains, and Boolean satisfiability. And these insights may be a part of our arsenal for understanding these amazing mysteries, sex, variation, and complex adaptations. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Christos. And you also receive a little gift. This is a wine from Burgenland, Panobile 2011, which is from a region south of Vienna, and I think you will like it, as I know you. Now, we are running very late. First of all, I want to say something. The coffee break is not all here. It's go to the building where you have the next talk, and there we will find the coffee break. Second, of course, we want to have questions, but we have to be very, very limited. And I would say, ask Christos to take at most 3 questions, and please formulate them briefly and give brief answers because we are really running late. Thank you.
So I'll be delighted to take your questions, but my answers will have to be brief. Moshe Vardi.
So there is, of course, a huge debate in evolution, whether evolution works at the level of the individual or the level of the big group skin selection. So are you coming out? Are you essentially arguing here for kin selection versus selection at the individual level? Repeat the question.
Moshe asked about the question of levels in evolution. Does it take place at the genes, at the individual, at the population, at the ecosystem, or where? Okay, so and I think there is no debate among evolutionary biologists. It takes at the level of the individual and population, and the kin selection, of course, is a phenomenon that exists. All right, but it's not believed that it is central. In other words, that there are evolution is so complicated that there is the canon, the main things, and then there are side phenomena, and kin selection is one of these.
Is it possible, using, say, your results or others, to give a computer simulation that would somehow provide some evidence that something like the eye can be created through a mechanism of evolution?
A great question. So you heard it. First of all, there are a lot of computer simulation experiments. There is a whole field called artificial life, a serious scientific field. AVIDA is one program that simulates life, and it's quite it's quite interesting what it produces. Okay, it has not yet solved problems, but it's fascinating what it does. All right, and about the eye is, I shouldn't have presented it as such a mystery. Okay, there are papers that go through the sequence of hundreds of adaptations through which the eye could have evolved. All right, the eye evolved. The eye is so important that it has evolved many times. The insect eye has nothing to do with our eye or the falcon eye, we know that it could have evolved. Still, it's still complex adaptations like this, and certainly the eusociality are still problematic for evolution. Let's take one last question from the back of the room. The gentleman there.
The map that you showed shows nothing about the energy that might be consumed or minimized in the selection process. Do you have some comment on that?
So the gentleman asked about the energy that is minimized during selection. The last piece of math that I showed you, the reverse engineering of this, is some kind of free energy. Okay, this is when I went back and said, what is this gene optimizing? That's the last mathematical slide that I told you. This reverse engineering of the function of the argmax. This is some kind of free energy. Energy is of course of great importance in all of the universe and life in particular, but it does not enter yet the theory of evolution, except I believe for very elementary organisms like bacteria, where people have been studying evolution under the lens of energy. Okay. All right. I am under strict instructions to conclude the question session.
Thank you very much.